Hello, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. I am Jeremy Birmingham. This is Talking Stuff. That is Andrew Ellis. We are talking stuff about Ohio State football recruiting. It's the same thing we do every time me and Andrew are together. There's going to be a lot of stuff to talk about because a lot has happened since the last time we were together. We're going to talk about that on the podcast right now. Andrew, as I said, since last we spoke up in this very venue, things have changed quite a bit in the Ohio State 2023 recruiting class, not to mention a lot of movement in the class of 2024. I figure we should probably just start with the bad news that's happened in the last 2 weeks, and that's a pair of decommitments in the class of 2023. The first of which was running back Mark Fletcher, American Heritage High School down in the Fort Lauderdale area of Florida. He has reopened his recruitment after making a number of visits to Miami and then Florida, and now talks about an official visit to Florida, an official visit to Miami. He was supposed to visit Ohio State this weekend for the game against Michigan. He's not going to. The ship has sailed. Ohio State is moving on. Mark Fletcher and his family are moving on. I don't want to be dismissive of the situation because it's not fair to the kid who had to make a very tough decision. But this happened about a week and a half ago. It's at this point, and so I don't want to belabor it too much. This was 90% an NIL decision and 10% wanting to stay closer to home. And that is the type of thing you're going to run into now on the recruiting trail. The state of Florida, which was always extremely difficult to recruit and to retain a recruitment and a commitment for a long period of time, is now that much more difficult when you have Miami, Florida, and Florida State all being very willing to play the NIL game.
Yeah, I think 2+ weeks ago, we probably felt pretty good about Mark Fletcher staying in the class. And then, there were some drum beats out there that kind of made this feel inevitable. It's unfortunate. I mean, the only running back in the class for Tony Alford in the class of 23. And I mean, it's a pretty big loss. They need a running back. I think the plan might even still be to get two. Maybe I thought maybe the South Florida Express ties and that kind of thing might have helped keep him in the class, but that was not meant to be, I guess. So they got to find somebody now.
Yeah, it's a weird situation because honestly, there had been a couple visits to Miami and there was no concern about Fletcher's commitment after the Miami trips. None. Then it was about 2 weeks ago, there was discussion on a Tuesday or Wednesday about a potential trip to Florida. And some of the concern from the Ohio State side was that it appeared that the Fletcher camp had reached out to Florida and not the other way around. And at that point, the alarm bells sort of went off for Ohio State that maybe this wasn't what they thought, because at that juncture, everything that they'd been hearing from Fletcher himself had been extremely positive and very upfront. And things sort of just shifted on a dime for the Buckeyes and the efforts to retain him in their class. And again, it's not entirely a surprise because when you recruit Florida, these are the types of things that happen. But it was just extremely disappointing talking to people around the Ohio State program, and that's how they felt it. Like it was sort of like they felt betrayed because they had been extremely loyal to Mark Fletcher for the previous 6 months and that he'd been committed. They had, turned down overtures from other running backs around the country in an effort to make sure that he felt like he was their priority. And then when it wasn't reciprocated, it just felt, #bad. And that is recruiting. It's a business. You can't feel like these pangs of regret or sorrow for these coaches who are making millions of dollars and hundreds of thousands of dollars, whatever. But at the same time, like the recruiting game, is about relationships. It is about that, hey, I'm trusting you, you need to trust me. And I think it's just another one of these areas where NIL has added such a unique wrinkle because not all, but most of the old rules are sort of out the window.
Yeah. I mean, it's a whole new ball game now. I think I know like he's got family members that are fans of Miami and that kind of thing. I guess maybe I'm a little surprised if it seems to be trending towards Florida. Miami's not playing well this season. I think Florida just lost to Vanderbilt or whoever it was. But yeah, I mean, it's a new ball game now with NIL. And fortunately for Ryan Day and Tony Alford, they got a couple other options out there as they look to get at least one, if not two, for the 23 class.
Yeah, we'll talk about the replacement options. I want to touch on the quarterback situation with Brock Glenn flipping to Florida State, and then we can just pretty much We have our list of things, but I feel like we can go position by position here in the class of
Yeah.
2023, do a quick accounting at each spot, and then we'll dive into the Ohio State Michigan visitors list and everything that we expect there, because that is obviously the talk of the week in Columbus, is who's all going to be in town and who's not. But we still should probably do a quick accounting. Anyway, Brock Glenn, as I mentioned, he reopened he flipped his commitment from Ohio State to Florida State on Monday evening. That is a situation that Ohio State was well aware of. The Buckeyes had informed Glenn in the last week or so that they were going to be interested in looking and potentially adding another quarterback to the class of 2023. And that Brock, if he wanted to remain in the Ohio State class, was more than welcome to, but they were going to continue to try to find someone else. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Number one, it's important to understand that Ohio State is going to head into the 2023 spring with Kyle McCord, Devin Brown, and whatever quarterback they sign in the class of 2023. We don't talk a lot about roster management and potential upheaval on this show specifically, but if you look at it just from an objective standpoint, if Devin Brown happens to beat out Kyle McCord in the spring and becomes Ohio State starter next year, I think most people believe that Kyle McCord will look to transfer. And at that point, you only have two quarterbacks, and that's Devin Brown, who will be a redshirt freshman, and then whatever true freshman quarterback you bring in the class of 2023, who will obviously look to enroll in January. 3 months ago, I don't think there was a lot of even belief that scenario was possible. But as the season has unfolded, you start to see a little bit more out of Devin Brown. You start to see a little bit more of the competition. You think, hey, maybe it's possible. And what was a strictly developmental quarterback need in the class of 2023 sort of changes to needing someone that's potentially more capable of stepping in and filling in the event of a catastrophe. So the priority of finding a guy who was more polished, more ready to go, sort of went up. And so at that juncture, it's, hey, do you just you take Glenn and say, try to find someone else? Do you look in the transfer portal? You don't know what you're going to get. So Ohio State really has been looking around the country the last 2 months to see who else could fit this role. And they were more than happy to have Glenn in the class as well with him. He had continued his relationship with Florida State. The Seminoles are doing a nice job in this season. They look to be a program on the rise. That was a program he had a lot of affection for before he committed to Ohio State, and it just seemed like a better fit. Obviously, Brock is not concerned about being a guy in a two quarterback class, because Florida State does have another quarterback committed, so it wasn't that. It's just about the fit for him, and that's, you just have to wish him well. Now, people are going to look at it, go, Ohio State's losing quarterbacks to Florida State, but it's not really the entirety of the situation.
Right. And, obviously the story of the upcoming offseason is going to be that 2023 quarterback battle. But I think if you're reading tea leaves here, when we, heard about the Ohio State coaching staff making a trip to South Dakota in October, of all places, South Dakota, that was probably a pretty good sign that something is brewing on the quarterback front. And, we found out the other day that something certainly has been brewing, and it's a big weekend on the quarterback front now. I don't think we were expecting it to be a big weekend on the quarterback front, but that has changed. So here we are.
Yeah, and that's the perfect launching spot on this episode of Talking Stuff, presented by the podcast, to dive into the visit of Lincoln Keenholz, the 4-time state champion in South Dakota, 3-time Joe Robbie Award winner in South Dakota as the state tournament MVP. He is a guy that has put up some silly high school statistics in his career there at Pierre T.F. Riggs High School. He is a 6'3", 185-pound kid who, if you put on the tape, it looks pretty good. He moves well. He's run for over 4,000 yards in his career, thrown for over 9,000. This is a kid that has been late developing. He's been committed to Washington since June. Primarily because Kalen DeBoer, the head coach at Washington, is also from South Dakota, and there was a little bit of a vibe there. But the reality is Lincoln Keenholz is understanding the difference and the opportunity that may be in front of him now to be Ryan Day's handpicked quarterback in the class of 2023, and that's something that he owes it to himself to at least take a good look at. So he's coming in this weekend for an official visit to Ohio State. I think what's interesting about this, Andrew, is that we'll talk a little bit more about other guys who are maybe not going to visit this weekend because they wanted a more in-depth official visit and more opportunity to get to talk to the Ohio State staff and see things about Ohio State that they maybe need to know beyond just what's the game day like. Keenholz was made aware of that and said, hey, I understand you guys are going to be somewhat busy this weekend. I want to experience the whole thing. And I would generally think that's a negative, but Devin Brown did the exact same thing a year ago and came in for a big game at the end of November against Michigan State when he had essentially 36 hours with Corey Dennis and Ryan Day and ended up committing to the Buckeyes 2 weeks later. So I don't think you can write it off and say, oh, this kid is only coming in to visit for the game. I think you have to look at this visit and the timing of it, the way this is all transpired, his activity on Twitter, etc. This seems like a kid who is leaning into the idea of being the Ohio State quarterback in this class.
Yeah, I mean, the kid sure seems confident. Just the last night, he's retweeting Brock Glenn's flip tweet about him making the move to Florida State, which I thought that was pretty interesting. But I mean, if you're the Washington coaching staff right now, obviously this is not a good sign for them. And if you're an Ohio State fan, you just have to simply trust Ryan Day, trust Corey Dennis. They've obviously got a track record here showing showing that they know what they're doing when it comes to the quarterback position. And I think it would be a bit of an upset at this point if by this time next week, Lincoln Keenholz is still committed to Washington. Maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, but that's just kind of the vibe I get right now.
Yeah, and there's going to be some conversation, and I've seen it in the Washington message board circles of Buckeyes haven't even offered him yet. Trust me, folks. He's not making this official visit without the idea that an offer is coming on this trip or that it's already been communicated to him privately that it's his and he just hasn't posted it. One of those two things is true. The reality is Ohio State is almost certainly going to have a public offer to him this weekend, and you'll see that on his social media and stuff like that. It does not preclude Ohio State from still continuing to look for another quarterback, whether that's in the transfer portal, whether that's in the class of 2023. I don't know. I guess I'd lean towards the transfer portal because you might want to find a veteran to try, especially if the case that I've already laid out of Devin Brown and Keenholz being the two quarterbacks on the roster at the end of next spring, you're going to need somebody that's played some football around the country to be a veteran in that room. So I think that you'll still see Ohio State probably look in the transfer portal to add one, but I don't want to even try to put any names out there because it's pointless because we don't know who's going to be in the transfer portal.
Yeah, and that's going to be the interesting thing, I think, is just if they do decide to look for another 23 guy, or if they focus on the portal. I tend to agree with you. It'll probably be the portal, but things are going to get very spicy if Kyle McCord is not the guy in 2023. But there's just obviously no way of knowing that now. And unfortunately, we haven't got to see a lot of passes thrown from CJ Stroud's backups this season. So it's going to be an interesting thing to watch.
Yeah, I still think McCord is the odds-on favorite to win the job. I just think that you, and by you, I mean the royal you as an Ohio State, they have to be prepared for any eventuality at this point because you can't predict college football the way that you used to. So I think everyone's mindset is that McCord should be the starter. And then the natural progression from McCord for 1 year to Devin Brown for 1 year to Keenholz competing with Dylan Raiola should be able to come to fruition, but you just don't know. That's quarterback in the class of 2023. Let's talk running back now that Mark Fletcher is decommitted, now that Ohio State is back on the market. There's a couple names we've talked about over at ohiostate.rivals.com. You should probably join us over there if you're watching this episode of Talking Stuff or any of the stuff we do on the podcast. Sign up, go to ohiostate.rivals.com/sign_up. Use promo code DTE30. You get a free month. We talk about a lot of this stuff more in depth on that message board and more regularly because we don't have time to do recruiting episodes on the podcast every day that I'd like to. But let's just talk the big names. Andrew, the first ones obviously are Justice Haynes, and Ruben Owens, the two 5-star type running backs. Number one ranked running back in the country, Ruben Owens. Number two, and Justice Haynes. I don't particularly think that Ohio State is going to land either of them at this point. I do not expect either of them to visit this weekend for the Ohio State-Michigan game, so let's just get that out in the open. I'm firmly in the camp that Justice Haynes is going to flip to Georgia, and I wouldn't be surprised if that happens in the next week or two. I don't think he'll wait until signing day to do it. It's my just personal belief from everything I've heard from the Ohio State side that they don't feel that they have a shot to flip him, but they do believe that Georgia does, and that continues to be a more of a drumbeat than it's ever been. And as far as Ruben Owens goes, he's committed to Louisville. He's been committed to Louisville since June. He's not made any other official visits anywhere to this point. He actually had one scheduled to Texas A&M earlier this season, and as soon as it became publicized, it got canceled. He did visit Louisville last weekend, so you just wonder if they were able to kind of stave things off. I think there's still an opportunity for Ohio State to get him on campus like the weekend of December 10th. But there's a couple things working against the Buckeyes here. Number one, to schedule an official visit, you have to have transcripts and academic records and stuff sent over from the school, from your high school to the college. El Campo, the school district, is off this week, the entire week for Thanksgiving break. So there's no way to get that. So even if he wanted to make the official visit this weekend, I don't think he'd be able to do it logistically. And as I mentioned with Lincoln Keenholz, this is a situation where Ohio State really wants a little bit more time to make sure that Ruben Owens is the right fit for the program. But they also want to make sure if he is there on campus that he's there on a weekend where they have time to pay full attention to him and not just have him in for the game where it's more of a potential clout chasing, here I am, check my pin drop, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, when the Ruben Owens potential visit news first surfaced, I just kind of brushed it to the side as, this is not going to
Which is
happen.
smart.
But then,
smart.
Yeah, I am smart. But then kind of as the week went on, maybe there was a little more to it than kind of what we had initially thought. But like you said, if it's not this weekend, I mean, maybe they can get that whole transcript situation figured out and get him up at some point. But I would say both he and Justice Haynes are just total like long shot pipe dreams right now. But Ohio State needs a running back, and they might even need two running backs. And as you're going to get into, there's a couple other names that are out there that we're watching very closely that are maybe more realistic at this point. So,
yeah, it's unfortunate, but the reality is the Buckeyes are put in this position at a fairly late time in the cycle, and you're not going to be able to really just go out and get the pick of the litter. I don't think that the Ruben Owens pursuit is over, but I would say that is going to be slowed down. I wrote on Monday that they're actually interested in doing some research and figuring it out, which is a surprise to me. I said last week on the message board that there's no way in hell he ends up at Ohio State. I will say that I guess there's some way in hell, but it's still a very small way in hell, like that he ends up at Ohio State. So we'll see if that official visit gets pushed back and if it actually happens. At this point, I don't expect it this weekend. Same thing for Jamarion Wilcox down at South Paulding High School in Georgia. That one I think is guaranteed to happen the weekend of December 9th and 10th, not this weekend. And on the flip side of all of this conversation about, prioritizing commitment or recruitment time over the game atmosphere, from what I've been told, Jamarion Wilcox actually has asked to come in for the December 10th weekend because he wants to make sure he has an opportunity to spend with Tony Alford, with Ryan Day, and really actually learn about the Ohio State program and not just be swept up in the emotion of the game weekend.
Yeah, and I mean, he's a really good player too. I think people are going to see he's not, doesn't have 5 little stars next to his name, but he's a really good player. I know Clemson, I think Kentucky, and obviously several others are in play there. It seems like right now he's maybe the odds-on favorite to end up as the back or one of the backs in the class, but we'll find out when he makes it to campus. I will say, I know I've heard a lot of the Georgia side is very high on him too. So he's an in-state kid, so an offer from Georgia would certainly mean a lot. But and I know he does have Ohio roots as well. But Georgia flipping Justice Haynes would kind of make me feel better about Kirby Smart not tossing his hat into that ring too. So we'll kind of see how that all goes.
Yeah, Wilcox is an interesting player because, as you mentioned, Georgia, but also other schools around the country, like Alabama, were sniffing around him in the summer when Ohio State had him on campus. And everyone was just sort of in this wait and see game to see who ended up where. Alabama ended up getting a commitment from Justice Haynes and Richard Young, and so they were sort of out. Georgia, I think, in the back of their mind, has always believed that they'd be able to flip Haynes, and so they've never had to push all in. With Wilcox, Ohio State had Fletcher committed, so they were not trying to upset the apple cart there, and they have been a fan of his for a while. And he did visit in the summer. He is from Cincinnati originally. He's just an extremely shy kid, doesn't talk about this stuff, is not speaking a lot to the Ohio State coaches. Tony Alford went down to South Paulding on Friday night, the night before the Ohio State game at Maryland. So he actually flew from Atlanta back to DC to get to College Park for Saturday afternoon's arrival there at Maryland. So the Buckeyes are very serious about him, but that one is probably on the back burner until the weekend of December 10th. Trey Cornist from Winton Woods High School in Cincinnati, who is a player that's really bumped up the rankings in the last few weeks. A lot of big time offers coming for him. He is visiting this weekend for the Ohio State Michigan game. He was at Michigan State last weekend. This is an unofficial visit. I think that the thing with Trey, I would imagine, is that it's about how patient he wants to be. I think if he's willing to hold off until the February signing period, the odds of him having an opportunity to go to Ohio State are way up. And I think he knows that. So I guess we'll see if he just weighs out his options.
Yeah, and if they do end up taking two backs, and it did end up being Wilcox and maybe a guy like Trey Cornist if he gets his offer, like those are two very different backs, and I like it when a class that has two backs has those two very different skill sets. You know, Wilcox is like what, like 5'9", 190 or something like that, and then you got Cornist who's more of that Fletcher, bigger, bruising kind of guy. I think he's like 6'1", 215. So I don't know if it does end up being a pair of 3 stars. If it were to be those 2 3 stars, I feel like that's a good pairing for Tony Alford and Ryan Day.
I agree. And plus, if you add 3 star plus 3 star, how many stars is that?
That would be like 6 stars, which would be a
Right.
very highly
That's
ranked
better.
kid, highest ever.
It's better than a 5 star. That's all I'm saying.
That is. That's a good point. That's a good
All
point.
about perspective. All about perspective. Wide receiver. We're just going to run down the list here. We won't take as much time on all of these positions, but I continue to have zero concern with any wide receiver commitment in the class of 2023. Bryson Rogers, Brandon Ennis, Noah Rogers, and Carnell Tate, all of which are expected back at Ohio State this weekend for the game against Michigan. All of the speculation about Miami and Ennis and Tennessee and Tate, North Carolina State and North Carolina for Rogers, just none of it's gonna be enough at this point to cause any real concern. So we're gonna move past that. Tight end, however, is an area where I think Ohio State fans are rightfully feeling a little bit weirded out by Jelani Thurman and the amount of attention he's giving to Auburn. He's been there like 5 times this season. The recurring theme is he has a lot of friends that play on that football team. It's close-ish to home. He likes just being there with his buddies and going to watch his friends play. All that's good. He's coming back to Columbus this weekend for the Michigan game. He was at Ohio State for the Notre Dame game. Like, he's saying all the right things to Ohio State, and this is where I'm going to sound like a little bit of a diva, I guess, and I hope this doesn't get clipped and put on the internet, whatever. But this is already on the internet, is what you're thinking. But he doesn't seem to be interested in talking to anybody in the Ohio State media world. But then you see interviews with him on Auburn websites, and that is bizarre for a kid who is committed to Ohio State and 100% locked into his commitment because, we're here a month from signing day. And you would think that relationship in the Ohio State media market would matter, especially in the world of NIL. And I know that in his recruitment, NIL is important. So this is an opportunity for him to start building his brand locally. And he seems averse to that. And that, to me, is a concern. Now, again, talking to Ohio State sources about it, none of them are concerned, but it's just causing my antenna to go up.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And I think 5 or 6 visits to any school is curious, especially if it's a school like Auburn, which in this case was number 2 and number 2 in the recruitment right behind Ohio
And they
State.
don't
But
have a
I do,
coach, right?
yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like, I do kind of wonder, if Auburn does hire the Lane train or hire Hugh Fraser or whatever. I mean, I know Lane Kiffin seems to be the hot name right now. Um, but I do wonder like how that might impact things. And, with the coaching change, he could make another official visit, I believe, and that could spice things up a little bit. So this weekend is going to be very, very important for somebody who's been a part of the class for a while now.
Yeah, and the reality is, Ohio State is not naive to the fact that this is happening. So there are a few tight ends that they are getting to know around the country, but they don't really feel like it's a major concern yet. I think it'll be interesting to see after this coming weekend if Ohio State maybe extends an offer to a tight end somewhere else. I think that's a good tea leaf to be able to read to see if they didn't like the vibe they got. But, again, I'm not trying to sound like nitpicky, but it's just bizarre when you read interviews from him talking to Auburn media members and Auburn websites, and yet doesn't seem interested at all in talking to Ohio State, websites. So just take that for what it's worth.
Yeah, I mean
Need a
that
half
that
minute to catch my breath. So much talking already.
uh, no, you're fine. I mean, if you end up losing Ty Lockwood and then Jelani Thurman, that's not a great look for a tight end class. So hopefully Ryan Day and Kevin Wilson can kind of fight off the pursuers here when he's in town this weekend.
Yeah, and again, because we're in such a different world in college football, you ask yourself, does this really matter? I mean, if Cade Stover returns to Ohio State next year, which is certainly a real possibility, the only player you're losing from that room is Mitch Rossi, unless there's somebody that transfers out. And so you'd still have Cade Stover, you'd still have Joe Royer, you'd still have G. Scott, you'd still have Sam Hart, you'd still have Bennett Christian. Like, that's a lot of tight ends. Um, it is realistic to think somebody else could transfer out, but at the same time, someone could transfer in. And so you don't necessarily need to panic and go out there and find someone that doesn't fit what you're looking for. They love Jelani Thurman as an athlete. They love what he can bring as a pass catcher at the tight ends position, which is why they were willing to go out and accept a commitment from him when they had Ty Lockwood, understanding that it could upset the things there. It did. But now to potentially lose Thurman, again, I'm not saying they are potentially losing him, but I know it's out in the ether, so I don't want to ignore it. Let's talk offensive line. I'm going to take a drink of this water on this episode of Talking Stuff while Andrew, prefaces the offensive line conversation.
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking about Samson Okunlola and possibly visiting or maybe not visiting for like the last seemingly 6 months. And my understanding, unless you have info that I don't have and that's changed, my understanding is that he is planning on making a visit this weekend. I think it's an official visit, correct? Am I correct in that?
If he visits, it will be an official visit, and I don't think
If.
it's gonna. I don't think it's gonna happen. I just don't. It's not been confirmed anywhere. It's been rumored in the last week, 10 days, that he's going to visit Ohio State, and he was deciding between Ohio State or USC for his official visit. I was told on Tuesday that he actually reached out to USC and asked if he could take an official visit to USC this weekend. Um, I don't know why he would do that. If he was planning on visiting Ohio State, I just don't think he wants to come to Ohio State. He seems like he's not interested in really building a relationship with Justin Fry, the offensive line coach. And I think it's just one of those stories that it's going to be talked about a lot. Just don't buy it. It's just not something I think is real, and I don't think it's been real. No matter how hard Ohio State has tried, he has just seemed very resistant to opening the line of conversation up with them. And so my personal opinion on this Wednesday, when this is being published on the internet, is that he will not visit. Now, similar to Ruben Owens, if he decides he wants to come visit in December, they'll probably let him. But they're not going to entertain him just so he can watch a football game this weekend, period. So if he's interested in Ohio State for real, then they'd love to have him come in and get to know the program and see what the opportunities are, because he's a really, really talented offensive tackle. But they're not going to bring him in just so he can watch a cool football game and get pictures taken.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's not the most surprising bit of news in the world. If you end up with an offensive line class with the three Ohio guys plus Miles Walker at tackle. I mean, that's still a good class, even if you are missing that 5-star left tackle type. So that's it's not a bad job for Justin Fry for his first class. So
No,
that's
and they
allowable.
really like
That's
Miles Walker. They really like Miles Walker. He's a player that we never talk about because he's so quiet, doesn't have any interest in being around. He is visiting this weekend. He'll be in town. I think he told me Thursday to Sunday, so it's a long weekend for him. It's a good opportunity for him to kind of reconnect with the staff in Columbus. But they love his upside. Um, but again, I know Ohio State fans are looking at it and saying, why do these elite tackles continue to avoid Ohio State when you're talking about potentially having 2 first-round picks at tackle after this season? And it's it's a money position, folks, and that's all I'm going to say. It is a position where money gets made at the tackle spots, and if you look closely at Samson Okunlola's top schools, Miami, Michigan State, he his season ended 10 days ago, and some 48 hours later he was in Gainesville for a 3-day weekend or a 3-day trip. Like, I don't want to keep pounding that drum and talking about NIL, but it's somewhat relevant when you're discussing why a player who you'd think would be a natural fit for Ohio State and has a huge positional need isn't really giving them any real time of day. So that's that on
yeah.
Samson.
I mean, we'll see. Maybe after the draft this coming April or May or whatever, after they do have two guys in the first round or two guys in the first 2 rounds, maybe you start to see an impact after that. Who knows? We'll see. This is something we talk about every cycle. It seems like, where's the 5-star left tackle? And here we are again. So
yeah, it's disappointing because I know that is the belief has been for months in Columbus that they were doing the right things and felt like he would be on campus this weekend. And the people I spoke with on Tuesday just don't seem to indicate any confidence that it's real or that it will happen. So I guess we'll see. I could be wrong. He could still show up, but even if he does show up this weekend, I don't think it's something that is worth monitoring closely. So that's the offensive line. Defensive line, it's the one we talk about all the time. Let's just do this real quick. Damon Wilson, I still think I think is in at Ohio State. Keon Keeley, I still believe he wants to choose Ohio State, but I don't think he will. I think he'll pick Alabama. I think that Mateo Uiagalelei is still closest to Ohio State, but I'm worried about Oregon and USC. None of those things have really changed. What has changed in the last 2 weeks is that Joshua Mickens, a 6'5", 230-pound defensive end from Indiana who's committed to LSU, took a visit to Ohio State for the Indiana game 2 weeks ago, and he's coming back this weekend for a visit for the Michigan game. That's an official visit. That's a big deal. I would have him in the Ohio State class right now if forced to pick today. So if you're talking about like potential commitment watch, he's a guy that could be on it in the next 10 days or so, I think. And I like a lot of what I see out of Mickens. He has really good senior tape and really good size. He could play the Jack/Leo position or be a traditional weak side type defensive end. So it's a good trade. Ohio State did not offer him because they were afraid they were losing ground on anyone else. They offered him because he's good enough to play at Ohio State.
yeah, and he's kind of a name that I've been like kind of watching for a while. Not because I don't know, just I've wondered why he's this kid from Indiana that's committed to LSU. That just you don't see that very often. And when he showed up last week, that was a promising sign. And now he's coming back already for his official. And I'm with you on that. If you end up with a defensive end class of Wilson plus Mickens, I mean, that's a fine class, even if you do end up missing on Keeley and Mateo. I think Alabama's coaching staff shakeup that could eventually happen here, depending on when it happens, is still something to watch in terms of the impact on Keeley. But I guess we'll see.
No, I agree. I mean, there's obviously a discussion about Alabama potentially replacing Pete Golding as defensive coordinator. There's been recent discussion about Coleman Hutzler, their outside linebackers coach, special teams coach, who's recruiting Keeley, potentially moving on. He's been, I think, in 6 different jobs in the last 8 years. So not a guy that seems to be sticking very long anywhere he is. And if it's about that relationship, and then there's been just some scuttlebutt about potentially Nick Saban calling it quits after this year. I don't know that I buy that entirely, but it's out there enough that people are having to ask about it, which is the first time that's ever really happened. So that is itself unique. But as you mentioned, the timing of that stuff is really what matters. If Alabama waits until after the bowl season for that any of that stuff to occur, then Keeley likely will already be signed, and then it becomes a different ballgame. But I don't expect Keon Keeley to be at Ohio State this weekend. There has been no real discussion about that in Columbus. Damon Wilson obviously will be. There's at this point no expectation that Mateo Uiagalelei will be there. He is playing in a number 1 versus number 2 ranked game this Friday night as St. John Bosco takes on Mater Dei in the California playoff. So to get from that game to Columbus by 10 a.m. the next morning is pretty impossible. So don't expect him to show up or anyone else from the Bosco family / Peyton Woodyards, etc. None of that stuff seems realistic. Linebacker. We're talking. Arian Carter, who was on Bermanology at the beginning of this week, is a great kid. I know there was a lot of buzz on the internets last week about it's a Tennessee-Alabama battle. Sorry, don't buy it. Just me. I just don't buy it. Do you? Do you buy it? You watched the interview. Do you buy it?
If I had just watched the interview, which was a fantastic interview, by the way. He does. You've said all along, he seems like an Ohio State kid. And watching that interview, I came away from that thinking just that he seems like an Ohio State kid. I know he's officially decommitted from Memphis now after months of talking about it. I don't know. My initial thought when he decommitted was, hey, he's gonna go to Alabama, but he seems like an Ohio State kid. So I'll leave it at that. I wouldn't be penciling him into the class right now, but if that ends up happening, would not be the most surprising thing in the world by any means.
Yeah, he's going to take an official visit to Tennessee and Alabama in December. There is, of course, as with every other player in the country, some discussion about NIL and how that can work into things. He is from Tennessee. I'm sure the Volunteers, who were not really a player in his recruitment at all until the last month or so, much like Ohio State, much like Alabama, is going to do everything they can to try to sell him on the idea of being a hometown hero and changing their defense and all the stuff that they have to do. Alabama was kind of first among the big schools to really get into this game and really force the decommitment from Memphis. But there is something different about the Ohio State program. And when you find the right kids that fit it, it becomes a very difficult thing for them to say no to. So I think you're going to hear more about Arian Carter in the next few weeks. I'm not saying he's not going to go to Alabama or Tennessee. I'm just saying do not believe the hype or believe that Ohio State is not involved in that battle, because they certainly are a team that's being seriously considered by Carter himself. Whether or not there's other people being told different things from coaches or whatever may be the case, but I'm just going to tell you from talking to Arian himself, from talking to people that have been getting to know him, they do not feel that way at all.
Yeah. And he's really the only linebacker to watch right now. Am I wrong on that?
Yeah,
I know
no,
obviously they have one
else
committed. Yeah. It's pretty not much going on there.
Well, I mean, especially when you look at the Ohio State senior day, the guys that are walking on Saturday, Tommy Eichenberg and Steel Chambers are not on that list. That doesn't mean they're coming back to Ohio State next year, but it certainly lends some credence to the idea that they may be. And so you don't want to, if those guys are coming back, you don't need to really push too hard in this class, especially because the class of 2024 just kick-started its linebacker recruiting on Monday night when Garrett Stover, Cade Stover's cousin, committed to Ohio State. He's listed as a safety. He's like 6'2", 210. The comparisons I've heard of for him are Pete Werner. And so I think that there's a more than good chance he ends up at linebacker. And so I think he'll be the first linebacker in that class. And now you can start building out. That could potentially be a 3 or 4 person linebacker class by the time it's said and done. So you don't need to rush into 2023 and add 1 or 2 more unless it's the perfect fit like Arian Carter is. So, of course,
yeah, I mean, they've
assuming Steele and Tommy come back.
Right. And they just got so many young guys there too, like Reed Carrico. And I think we probably still expect Sonny Styles to move down there eventually. I mean, I don't know that for a fact, but they're not hurting at linebacker for the next couple years, I would say. But next year's class is probably going to be a bigger one, as you alluded to.
Yeah, and you just don't know what's going to happen. I mean, again, Tommy and Steele could change their mind. Maybe they haven't even thought about it yet, and maybe I just generally think that someone deciding when they've been in the program for 4 years to not walk on senior day against Michigan is a sign that they're at least intending to return. So I think those guys all, Tommy Steele and Cade Stover, who are all roommates, live together. I think it's kind of going to be a pact. Like they all decide to all stay together or all go together. And I think they're probably leaning towards staying.
Yeah, maybe Tommy wants to be a finalist for the Buckeyes next year.
What
so
a sham! My God, what a sham!
yeah, that's just weird, but whatever.
What you learn is that there's a lot of people who vote on college football awards who don't watch college football. That's what you learn.
Yep.
Goose fraba. Cornerback. We're at 40 minutes. We're gonna try to keep rolling here. I don't know exactly how long this is gonna go. My goal is keep it under an hour. We got a lot of other stuff to talk about. My goodness, do we?
Mm-hmm.
Cornerback. Right now, Ohio State's got the 3 corners committed: Jermaine Matthews, Kayan Lee, Calvin Simpson Hunt. Jermaine Matthews and Kayan Lee will be on campus this weekend. Calvin Simpson Hunt will not be. I think he's still playing down there in Texas. Not expected to make the trip. Barring anything crazy happening with one of those guys, I do not see Ohio State needing to add anyone else at that position. There has been a lot of discussion in the last few weeks about Cameron Calhoun, who's recently decommitted from Cincinnati. He's a teammate of Jermaine Matthews at Winton Woods, also teammate of Trey Cornist. Cam camped at Ohio State the same day that Jermaine Matthews did. Jermaine got the offer, Cam didn't. To me, it was sort of like a Joe Royer and Luke Lachey situation 3 years ago where you kind of knew one of them was going to get it, but you didn't really anticipate that they both would. Calhoun's a really good player, so don't think that he's not because they haven't offered him, but they're not trying to overdo the position. And you may see him end up at Michigan, which will be a unfortunate turn of events because they would like to find room for him in this class if they could, but they're not going to do that unless someone else makes a decision to move on, which there's no expectation of. So that's where the cornerback situation is. It's good. It's happy. Jermaine Matthews is rising up the national rankings. It seems like every time there's an update, he's moved way up. Kayan Lee's continued to play solid football. It's another guy though that has been to Auburn a few times, and you just wonder like if they hire someone big time like Lane Kiffin that really moves the dial, and they have, from what I've been told, a fairly good sized NIL war chest ready to be unleashed when the new coach arrives. Some of that's going to be saved for the transfer portal. Some of it's going to be, allocated for recruits. So you just don't know. That's why you're always kind of still evaluating. That's why you're still talking to these kids there. That's why you can't just say, okay, well, we're done here. No one call us. We can't talk to you anymore. They're going to keep working that.
Yeah, and like you said, I think cornerback recruiting is essentially done. Would be nice to see Calvin Simpson Hunt get back up here at some point, but like you said, he's playing. Doesn't seem like somebody who really likes the recruiting process all that much either. So maybe him being quiet and not coming up here isn't the worst thing in the world, but we'll see.
Yeah, Texas plays their high school tournament, I think, into February. So, you just don't know. I mean, there's 7,000 teams there playing 46 games or something. So it's kind of weird. Safety. Should we talk safety? Does that seem like a position people are interested in?
Yeah, I think it does. I think it does.
Safety. Ohio State has 3 committed. They have had 3 committed for a long time. They have Jaden Bonsu. They have Malik Hartford. They have Cedric Hawkins. And there is no concern at this point that anything goes badly with any of them. All those 3 are pretty locked in. Despite some, again, rumors with Cedric Hawkins of visits to Auburn, Florida State, etc. There's not a concern. That's it. Nothing else to talk about safety. I guess we could talk about Caleb Downs if people wanted to speculate on what's going to happen this weekend, because it sort of seems to be the storyline of the month, right? Let's just get it on the record. Yeah. What do you think happens? Do you think he comes to Ohio State, Michigan, or do you think he goes to Alabama, Auburn? Because those are the options, right?
I think if he does come to Ohio State, Michigan, it means that he's going to end up at Ohio State. I think most people would agree with that. You're skipping out on the Iron Bowl and a huge recruiting weekend for Alabama. to come to Columbus in late November. Gosh, like a week ago, I would have told you that I was like 80% he ends up visiting Alabama. But right now, I kind of lean the other way, just for no real reason. He's still on if you look at Alabama visitor lists among the Alabama websites, he's still on every one. I don't think he's going to tell anybody specifically what he's doing. So I kind of wonder if it'll just be one of those Friday night, Saturday morning news drops if he does arrive. I'm kind of leaning towards him ending up visiting Ohio State this weekend. Just a hunch, nothing more.
Yeah. I think that your point about finding out Saturday morning is probably right. I don't think anyone's going to know for sure. He's still playing. Mill Creek has a game on Friday night at 7:30.
Right.
The good news is that that's Atlanta. It's an hour flight. It's not something like somebody out in California where you have time zone changes and all that stuff. You can fly up at midnight from Atlanta to Columbus any day of the week. You can fly up at 6 a.m. There's plenty of opportunity to get there. I can't think of something that is more telling to me about what a player's intention may be than skipping, as you mentioned, the Iron Bowl to go to the game in Columbus, because Alabama, for all of their success, for everything they've done well over the last decade plus 15 years, this might be the one time where there appears to be, at least on the outside looking in, this chink in the armor. And this weekend in Tuscaloosa is an absolute building weekend for Alabama. They want all of their class of 2023, the number one ranked class in the country. They need every one of those recruits there to show a unified front and say, we're going to keep doing this. We're building this class. Things aren't changing. Alabama's not going anywhere, blah, blah, blah. I don't think I'm not trying to say that they are going anywhere. I'm not trying to be dramatic about it, but it is a weird time in Tuscaloosa compared to the way things have been recently. If you, as a recruit, and especially not just a recruit, but a 5-star, in my opinion, the best player in the country, if you decide to not visit there and instead go to Ohio State to visit the team that was the number 2 team in your recruitment, we talked about Jelani Thurman, a lot of the same dynamics at play. The number 2 team in your country, the number 2 ranked team in the country, a team that has a defense that features the safety like no one else in the country does. The relationships with Perry Eliano, Ryan Day, all these things, the relationships he has with players committed to Ohio State, players on the Ohio State roster, a lot of reasons that trip means a lot. But just to say I'm not going to be at the biggest game of the year for Alabama, which that one is at home. It's the biggest game they're going to play at home this year because they didn't play Tennessee at home. They haven't, they didn't play LSU at home. Like, that is making a choice in some way. And I think that's important to recognize, but it's also important to recognize, as you said, he's not going to go out and put on Twitter on Friday night, hey, Columbus, coming your way, or anything like that. Like, if he's going to show up, he's going to show up. Ohio State is hoping he shows up. Ohio State has felt they've done everything they can to try to say, Caleb, we want you here. We'd love to have you here. The reception from him has been generally positive. There is optimism that he may show up, but they're not going to come right out and say it. And nobody is. So you just keep your fingers crossed, I guess, if you're an Ohio State fan for this weekend.
Yeah, and I think one of the big things that you said all along with Caleb Downs is just there had been talk leading up to the season about how the defense is going to change, the safeties are going to be better, and now he's had a few months to see that the safeties are playing better. The defense as a whole is playing better. It's not perfect, but it's made tremendous strides since last year. And Ronnie Hickman's now leaving to go to the NFL, and I don't know. I have a hunch he shows. I know it's not going to be out there publicly, but I just have this tingly feeling in my loins, I guess, that it's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, there's still a real opportunity. Lathan Ransom goes to the NFL. Tanner McAllister will be wrapping up his eligibility and off to the next level. There's an opportunity for safeties to come in and make a difference, and a few of them are more positioned to do that than Caleb Downs. No matter where he goes to school, Ohio State will make sure he is well aware of that. That pretty much wraps up the position by position in the class of 2023. I want you, if you can, Andrew, kind of row the boat from here, if you don't mind. Like, what do you want? What else in the class of 2024 should we dive into? I guess the first one, since this is going on Wednesday night, should be Tysier Denmark, the wide receiver from Philadelphia, who is making his college decision on Thursday, on Thanksgiving. This has been a weird 72 hours in this recruitment. And right now, it looks like it's going to be Oregon, not Ohio State, like people have thought for the last month. There's a reason why when all the buzz started about Denmark about a month ago, I did not put in a future cast for Ohio State on the Rivals Network because I just felt like something weird could happen. And now here we are. I didn't entirely buy that Denmark's recruitment would be that simple to figure out.
Yeah, I mean, we've obviously talked a long time about Jeremiah Smith being the number one target in the class, and we talked about guys like Mylan Graham from Indiana, who maybe has some things to work on before committing somewhere. And I don't know. I really don't know if something in Brian Hartline's mind just changed, or if he's more fond of somebody else, whether it be Graham or whomever. But if Denmark does end up committing to Oregon here in the next 24 or 48 hours, whatever, there's still a lot of all of Ohio State's top targets are still out there, really, for wide receivers. So it has been an interesting 48, 72 hours, like you've said, though. So that one's kind of flipped.
Everyone's out there, including Denmark. There's a year until he can sign, and he's going to commit to a school. A lot of the reason why, actually, Saturday, the conversation I was having with people about this recruitment was that he was going to delay his decision and push it back past Thursday because he didn't get a chance to visit Ohio State during the season. He didn't get a chance to go to Tennessee, Oregon, these places he wanted to go to, and now he's going to make a decision without having those trips occurring. I don't think it's going to hold up either way. If it does, great, but I think that this recruitment is far from over. And the same can be said for pretty much every receiver in the country. It's not a position that, generally speaking, is drama free. So you certainly are used to some drama for if you're into following Brian Hartline's recruiting. The guys that he picks are generally very highly sought after and are continually being recruited by everyone around the country. So to expect that there's not going to be any changes from here would be folly. And I think that it's just important to understand that whatever Denmark doesn't preclude him from choosing another school down the road and getting back to Ohio State. And that relationship needs to, keep growing. And like Mylan Graham, I have heard that there might be some off the field things he needs to work out and get, taken care of before he's going to be really able to look at a full complement of schools around the country. So who knows?
Yeah, I think other than that, it's just there's plenty of big 2024 guys that are going to be there this weekend of the unofficial visit variety, whether it's KJ Bolden or Bryce West or Stacey Gage, and running back's going to be huge for this class again. So maybe they can keep chipping away at Gage there. But
yeah, I don't think Bryce West will be on campus. Glenville's going to be playing Saturday, so you can
that's right.
Scratch him off your list. But it is a big weekend for Aaron Scott, the cornerback from Springfield. The one that's really important for this weekend is Jordan Marshall from Cincinnati Moeller. He is a player, a running back in the class of 2024 that up until about 6 weeks ago, I don't think Ohio State really had him circled as like priority. I would tell you pretty confidently right now, if you had to put them in an order, he'd be ahead of where Stacey Gage is on the list for Ohio State. So this is a big weekend, especially because I really believe that the top two schools for Marshall are Ohio State and Michigan. So this could be one of those very rare in-state battles for Ohio State with Michigan that they're sort of on equal footing in the player's mind. So Jordan Marshall's a big one. I don't know. Is Ellis Robinson the fourth visiting? Has that been confirmed?
I've seen him on the tentative list, but you know how this goes. Like nobody's going to know for sure until, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Dylan Raiola will not be in town this weekend. He's playing Friday night. So unfortunately, you can count him off the list. That, he wants to be there. But again, coming from Arizona and all the time changes and all that stuff make it nearly impossible to get there. This is one of those situations where I love the tradition of the Ohio State-Michigan game being at noon, but as recruiting becomes so much more involved and so much more important, I do wonder if at times Ohio State should look to pushing this game back to 3:30 if they can, just in order to make sure that kids from other parts of the country have a chance to get there, because you're sort of eliminating a number of big time recruiting options from making the trip.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't disagree with you on that. It is hard for some of those kids that don't live, right down the road. Um, but yeah, I guess the other thing I'm just kind of waiting to see is surprises. What other people what other players just kind of show up. Um, I know like Joshua Mickens a couple weeks back. I don't think anybody was really expecting him to be on campus, and then he's just kind of there. So I know you're going to be on the field doing your thing with your camera, and I guess you'll be one of the first to pinpoint
Yeah.
the teenage football players that could just be kind of showing up out of nowhere. And there's going to be somebody, because there always is. That's just how these things go.
There's going to be a lot of them, I predict. Here's the reality. On Saturday, I'm going to get into the stadium just about 8:45 a.m. And we will be watching that tunnel, that the walkway down the tunnel onto the field from about 10 o'clock to 11:58 to see who walks down that tunnel. And if you are able to be at ohiostate.rivals.com, you can join us there and stay up to date with it. That's the best way if you're interested in seeing who shows up, or you can follow us on Twitter. But the Rivals website and the message board as well, we'll be putting most of that content immediately on Saturday. So hopefully the game does not disappoint from a recruiting standpoint. I'm confident it will not disappoint from a football standpoint. So it should be one heck of a weekend in Columbus, and Andrew Ellis and myself, Jeremy Birmingham, will continue to try and bring you all of the stuff that matters from it. Andrew, is there anything else on this episode of Talking Stuff?
Not really. Thanksgiving's Thursday. This is just an awesome weekend of everything. Football on Thursday, and then through the whole weekend, it's just one of my favorite weekends of the year. So I can't wait for it.
Yeah, I am excited to have an opportunity to look at this visit list on Saturday. There are schools around the country who just hand media members who's visiting, like they tell them all on Friday. Ohio State does not do that, folks. Like, we have to dig and root around to find who's visiting. So sometimes the information may be incomplete, but we're doing our best, I promise. And if you like what we're doing, please rate, review, subscribe. Turn on that little bell on the bottom of your YouTube channel where it says notifications, so that when you do get new content, or when we put out new content, you're immediately getting it. We genuinely thank you for all the support this season. We're not done, but the next couple weeks are going to be a little bit different as we go into the postseason, signing day, etc. We'll try to be as frequent as we can with talking stuff, terminologies, and everything else on the recruiting side, as well as everything else we do on football side. So for Andrew Ellis, I'm Jeremy Birmingham. This has been Talking Stuff on the podcast. Thanks for watching. We will see you next time.